Ah, apologies for my lack of punctuality. Oh, I was so like wrapped up in what I was doing. I forgot to like turn up the mic. There we go. Hello. Good evening. Um, like everyone else, I was kind of involved with like I wasn't very like actively watching earlier, but I was like tuning into the Nintendo Direct. Actually, like immediately after it ended, I had to like get up and just immediately make myself a pot of tea cuz Lord knows I'm going to need it tonight. It's still hot. But my cookies from Monday turned out well. Oh, that's great. I'm happy to hear that. Yeah, I love some good shortbread myself. Very nice. Although I don't really have the opportunity to make them very often. But yeah, I was watching the Nintendo Direct earlier. Not too many standouts obviously, but I was not be they ended up not really being shortbread, but they were still good. That's good. I mean, as long as it tastes good, that's all that matters, as I say. But the one thing I was surprised with during the Nintendo Direct, they kind of just like dropped a new Professor Layton game pretty much out of nowhere. I mean, there was no like there was no actual gameplay footage beyond like a little teaser trailer just to be like, hey, this exists. But yeah, really unexpected, honestly. Especially considering we haven't had a Professor Layton game for like a decade now, I think. Thereabouts. But yeah. Honestly, I've never really played. I did try to play Professor Layton. I think it was like the first game. I think that was like one of the first games that I ever streamed when I did one of my first like forays into like attempting to become a streamer. But yeah, other than that, I haven't really had too much experience with the franchise, I don't think. So that's that. Played one of the ones on 3DS. Yeah, I think that was like the last one they made before this one. Phoenix Wright crossover. Honestly, I forgot that even happened. That's just one of those really bizarre ones. Like you don't really expect that kind of thing to happen, but I guess it works. It kind of works. Let's see if my tea's cooled down a bit. Also, fair warning, I might be a little bit off my game tonight because for whatever reason, my ears are a little bit ringy currently. They started being like that while I was watching the direct earlier, and I'm not sure why, but I mean, I hopefully that just kind of like goes away, but it might make me a little bit distracted. But yeah, honestly, I was gonna put up a picture of my Chia Pet on stream, but I forgot to upload it from my phone onto the computer. But my Chia Pet, if you've been keeping up with it on Twitter, it's starting to like grow buds finally. I should probably actually post that like tomorrow or something. So very exciting. I also I bought a basil plant from the grocery store, from like the fresh herb section. And I was planning on like taking the individual like plant stalks, the individual plants, because it's kind of just like a big thing in like one container, like multiple ones. I was planning on trying to like divvy them up into their own containers so they could like grow by themselves and I wouldn't have to cultivate basil from seeds, but honestly so far that has not, it hasn't been the best. I tried one like very small one, which was probably a mistake because it seemed kind of underdeveloped anyways. So I'm pretty sure it ended up like succumbing to root shock, and I don't think it's gonna bounce back from that. I tried it again with a more developed one earlier today. It seems like it's also going into root shock, but hopefully this one will be like, it'll be hardy enough to bounce back, but we'll see. We will certainly see. I don't. I was trying to think of anything else I could do to like pad out the conversation. Oh yeah, I did have a new follower, as you can see above me here. I had a new follower follow between streams, as it often happens. So Nylaki or Nylaki? I'm not quite sure how to pronounce that, but regardless, thank you. I'm pretty sure they are not here right now, but regardless, I like to thank everyone. Let me take one more sip of my tea. I should also put my pen away. I was like putting the last touches on the new icons for the redeems, like while I was watching the direct. So that's what I was doing for the past like hour. I got all but one done. The eye hide one I still need to make an icon for, but everything else is done now. So that's good. Let me take one more sip and then we'll get started. All right, this is like I said in the title, I don't remember what part of like what number of this, what stream number we're on for reading Misery, but we're currently on chapter 22, about halfway through the book. I mean, honestly, it might actually be a little bit further because this I think this is a version where it has like a preview of the sequel, Doctor Sleep, at the end, which I'm probably not gonna read because honestly, I don't care that much. I don't think so. For all intents and purposes, we might be like a little more than halfway at this point. But I guess without further ado, we'll just go ahead and get right into it. Chapter 22, In the Truck. I see a bad moon arising. I see trouble on the way. I see earthquakes and lightning. I see bad times today. Don't go round tonight. It's bound to take your life. There's a bad moon on the rise. Someone had added a very old Buick car radio under the hotel truck's dashboard, and now tinny and choked with static. The distinctive sound of John Fogerty's Creedence Clearwater Revival Band came out of the speaker. Wendy and Danny were on their way down to Sidewinder. The day was clear and bright. Danny was turning Jack's orange library card over and over in his hands and seemed cheerful enough, but Wendy thought he looked drawn and tired, as if he hadn't been sleeping enough and was going on nervous energy alone. The song ended and the disc jockey came on. Yeah, that's Creedence. And speaking of bad moon, it looks like it may be rising over the KMTX listening area before long. Hard as it is to believe with the beautiful spring-like weather we've enjoyed for the last 3 days. The KMTX Fearless Forecaster says high pressure will give way by 1 o'clock this afternoon to a widespread low-pressure area which is just gonna grind to a stop in our KMTX area, up where the air is rare. Temperatures will fall rapidly, and precipitation should start around dusk. Elevations under 7,000 feet, including the Metro Denver area, Can expect a mixture of sleet and snow, perhaps freezing on some roads, and nothing but snow up here, cuz. We're looking at 1 to 3 inches below 7,000 and possible accumulations of 6 to 10 inches in central Colorado and on the slope. The Highway Advisory Board says that if you're planning to tour the mountains in your car this afternoon or tonight, you should remember that the chain law will be in effect. And don't go nowhere unless you have to. Remember, the announcer added jocularly, that's how the Donners got into trouble. They just weren't as close to the nearest 7-Eleven as they thought. A Clairol commercial came on, and Wendy reached down and snapped the radio off. You mind? That's okay. He glanced out at the sky, which was bright blue. Guess Daddy picked just the right day to trim those hedge animals, didn't he? I guess he did, Wendy said. Sure doesn't look much like snow, though, Danny added hopefully. Getting cold feet, Wendy asked. She was still thinking about that crack the disc jockey had made about the Donner Party. Nah, I guess not. Well, she thought, this is the time. If you're going to bring it up, do it now or forever hold your peace. Danny, she said, making her voice as casual as possible. Would you be happier if we went away from the Overlook? If we didn't stay the winter? Danny looked down at his hands. I guess so, he said. Yeah, but it's Daddy's job. Sometimes, she said carefully, I get the idea that Daddy might be happier away from the Overlook, too. They passed a sign which read Sidewinder 18 miles, and then she took the truck cautiously around a hairpin and shifted up to second. She took no chances on these downgrades. They scared her silly. Do you really think so? Danny asked. He looked at her with interest for a moment and then shook his head. No, I don't think so. Why not? Because he's worried about us, Danny said, choosing his words carefully. It was hard to explain. He understood so little of it himself. He found himself harking back to an incident he had told Mr. Halloran about. The big kid looking at department store TV sets and wanting to steal one. That had been distressing, but at least it had been clear what was going on, even to Danny. Then little more than an infant. But grown-ups were always in a turmoil, every possible action muddied over by thoughts of the consequences, by self-doubt, by self-image, by feelings of love and responsibility. Every possible choice seemed to have drawbacks, and sometimes he didn't understand why the drawbacks were drawbacks. It was very hard. He thinks, Danny began again, and then looked at his mother quickly. She was watching the road, not looking at him, and he felt maybe he could go on. He thinks maybe we'll be lonely, and then he thinks that he likes it here, and it's a good place for us. He loves us and doesn't want us to be lonely or sad, but he thinks even if we are, it might be okay in the long run. Do you know long run? She nodded. Yes, dear, I do. He's worried that if we left, he couldn't get another job, that we'd have to beg or something. Is that all? No, but the rest is all mixed up, because he's different now. Yes, she said, almost sighing. The grade eased a little, and she shifted cautiously back to third gear. I'm not making this up, Mommy. Honest to God. I know that, she said, and smiled. Did Tony tell you? No, he said. I just know. That doctor didn't believe in Tony, did he? Never mind that doctor, she said. I believe in Tony. I don't know what he is or who he is. If he's a part of you that's special, or if he comes from somewhere outside. But I do believe in him, Danny. And if he think we should go, we will. The two of us will go and be together with Daddy again in the spring. He looked at her with sharp hope. Where? A motel? Hun, we couldn't afford a motel. It would have to be at my mother's. The hope in Danny's face died out. I know, he said, and stopped. What? Nothing, he muttered. She shifted back to second as the grade steepened again. No, Doc, please don't say that. This talk is something we should have had weeks ago, I think. So please, what is it you know? I won't be mad. I can't be mad because this is too important. Talk straight to me. I know how you feel about her, Danny said and sighed. How do I feel? Bad, Danny said, and then rhyming, sing-song, frightening her. Bad, sad, mad. It's like she wasn't your mommy at all, like she wanted to eat you. He looked at her, frightened. And I don't like it there. She's always thinking about how she would be better for me than you, and how she could get me away from you. Mommy, I don't want to go there. I'd rather be at the Overlook than there. Let me take a sip. Wendy was shaken. Was it that bad between her and her mother? God, what hell for the boy if it was. What hell for the boy if it was, and he could really read her thoughts for each other. She suddenly felt more naked than naked, as if she had been caught in an obscene act. All right, she said. All right, Danny. You're mad at me, he said in a small, near to tears voice. No, I'm not. Really, I'm not. I'm just sort of shook up. They were passing a Sidewinder 15 miles sign, and Wendy relaxed a little. From here on in, the road was better. I want to ask you one more question, Danny. I want you to answer it as truthfully as you can. Will you do that? Yes, Mommy, he said, almost whispering. Has your daddy been drinking again? No, he said, and smothered the two words that rose behind his lips after that simple negative. Not yet. Wendy relaxed a little more. She put a hand on Danny's jeans-clad leg and squeezed it. Your daddy has tried very hard, she said softly, because he loves us. And we love him, don't we? He nodded gravely. Speaking almost to herself, she went on. He's not a perfect man, but he has tried. Danny, he's tried so hard. When he stopped, he went through a kind of hell. He's still going through it. I think if it hadn't been for us, he would have just let go. I want to do what's right. And I don't know. Should we go? Stay? It's like a choice between the fat and the fire. I know. Would you do something for me, Doc? What? Try to make Tony come right now. Ask him if we're safe at the Overlook. I already tried, Danny said slowly. This morning. What happened? Wendy asked. What did he say? He didn't come, Danny said. Tony didn't come. And then he suddenly burst into tears. Danny, she said, alarmed. Honey, don't do that, please. The truck swerved across a double yellow line and she pulled it back, scared. Don't take me to Grandma's, Danny said through his tears. Please, Mommy, I don't want to go there. I want to stay with Daddy. All right, she said softly. All right, that's what we'll do. She took a Kleenex out of the pocket of her Western-style shirt and handed it to him. We'll stay, and everything will be fine. Just fine. All right, that was the first chapter. Hold on, let me take a bigger sip. Okay, we're all good. Chapter 23, In the Playground. Jack came out onto the porch, tucking the tab of his zipper up under his chin, blinking into the bright air. In his left hand, he was holding a battery-powered hedge clipper. With his right hand, swiped his lips with it and tucked it away. Wait, did I? Okay. I was just like going back mentally to see if I read that correctly. 23 is my favorite number. Oh, that's nice. I hope you'll enjoy this one. Snow, they had said on the radio. It was hard to believe, even though he could see the clouds building up on the far horizon. He started down the path to the topiary, switching the hedge clipper over to the other hand. It wouldn't be a long job, he thought. A little touch-up would do it. The cold nights had surely stunted their growth. The rabbit's ears looked a little fuzzy, and 2 of the dog's legs had grown fuzzy green bone spurs. But the lions and the buffalo looked fine. Just a little haircut would do the trick, and then the snow would come. The concrete path ended as abruptly as a diving board. He stepped off it and walked past the drained pool to the gravel path, which wound through the hedge sculptures and onto the playground itself. He walked over to the rabbit and pushed the button on the handle of the clippers. It hummed into quiet life. "Hi, Brer Rabbit," Jack said. "How are you today? A little off the top and get some of the extra off your ears?" "Fine. Say, did you hear the one about the traveling salesman and the old lady with a pet poodle?" His voice sounded unnatural and stupid in his ears, and he stopped. It occurred to him that he didn't care much for these hedge animals. It had always seemed slightly perverted to him to clip and torture a plain old hedge into something that it wasn't. Along one of the highways in Vermont, there had been a hedge billboard on a high slope overlooking the road, advertising some kind of ice cream. Making nature peddle ice cream, that was just wrong. It was grotesque. You weren't hired to philosophize, Torrance. Ah, that was true. So true. He clipped along the rabbit's ears, brushing a small litter of sticks and twigs off onto the grass. The hedge clipper hummed in that low and rather disgustingly metallic way that all battery-powered appliances seemed to have. The sun was brilliant, but it held no warmth, and now it wasn't so hard to believe that snow was coming. Working quickly, knowing that to stop and think when you were at this kind of task usually meant making a mistake, Jack touched up the rabbit's face. Up close it didn't look like a face at all, but he knew that at a distance of 20 paces or so, light and shadow would seem to suggest one, that in the viewer's imagination. And then zipped the clippers along its belly. That done, he shut the clippers off, walked down toward the playground, and then turned back abruptly to get it all at once, the entire rabbit. Yes, it looked all right. Well, he would do the dog next. But if it was my hotel, he said, I'd cut the whole damn bunch of you down. He would, too. Just cut them down and resod the lawn where they'd been, and put in 6 small metal tables with gaily colored umbrellas. People could have cocktails on the Overlook's lawn in the summer sun. Slow gin fizzes and margaritas and pink ladies and all those sweet tourist drinks. A rum and tonic, maybe. Jack took his handkerchief out of his back pocket and slowly rubbed his lips with it. Come on, he said softly. That was nothing to be thinking about. He was going to start back, and then some impulse made him change his mind, and he went down to the playground instead. It was funny how he never knew kids, he thought. He and Wendy had always expected Danny to love the playground. It had everything a kid could want. But Jack didn't think the boy had been down 6 times, if that. He supposed if there had been another kid to play with, it would have been different. The gate squeaked slightly as he let himself in, and then there was crushed gravel crunching under his feet. He went first to the playhouse, the perfect scale model of the Overlook itself. It came up to his lower thigh, just about Danny's height, when he was standing up. Jack hunkered down and looked in the 3rd-floor windows. The giant has come to eat you all up in your beds, he said hollowly. Kiss your AAA rating goodbye. But that wasn't funny either. You could open the house simply by pulling it apart. It opened on a hidden hinge. The inside was a disappointment. The walls were painted, but the place was mostly hollow. But of course it would have to be, he told himself. Or how else could the kids get inside? What play furniture might go with the place in the summer was gone, probably packed away in the equipment shed. He closed it up and heard the small click as the latch closed. He walked over to the slide, set the hedge clipper down, and after a glance back at the driveway to make sure Wendy and Danny hadn't returned, he climbed to the top and sat down. This was a big kid slide, but the fit was still uncomfortably tight for his grown-up ass. How long had it been since he had been on a slide? 20 years? It didn't seem possible it could be that long. It didn't feel that long, but it had to be that or more. He could remember his old man taking him to the park in Berlin when he had been Danny's age, and he had done the whole bit. Slides, swings, teeter-totters, everything. He and the old man would have a hot dog lunch and buy peanuts from the old man with a card afterward. They would sit on a bench to eat them, and dusky clouds of pigeons would flock around their feet. Hold on, let me take a sip. Goddamn scavenger birds, his dad would say. Don't you feed them, Jackie. But they both wound up feeding them and giggling at the way they ran after the nuts. The greedy way they ran after the nuts. Jack didn't think the old man had ever taken his brothers to the park. Jack had been his favorite, and even so, Jack had taken his lumps when the old man was drunk, which was a lot of the time. But Jack had loved him for as long as he was able, long after the rest of the family could only hate and fear him. He pushed off with his hands and went to the bottom, but the trip was unsatisfying. The slide, unused, had too much friction, and no really pleasant speed could be built up. And his ass was just too big. His adult feet thumped into the slight dip where thousands of children's feet had landed before him. He stood up, brushed at the seat of his pants, and looked at the hedge clipper. But instead of going back to it, he went to the swings, which were also a disappointment. The chains had built up rust since the close of the season, and they squealed like things in pain. Jack promised himself he would oil them in the spring. You better stop it, he advised himself. You're not a kid anymore. You don't need this place to prove it. But he went on to the cement rings. They were too small for him, and he passed them up. And then to the security fence, which marked the edge of the grounds. He curled his fingers through the links and looked through, the sun cross-hatching shadow lines on his face like a man behind bars. He recognized the similarity himself, and he shook the chain-link fence. Put a harried expression on his face and whispered, "Let me out of here, let me out of here." But for the third time, not funny. It was time to get back to work. That was when he heard the sound behind him. He turned around quickly, frowning, embarrassed, wondering if someone had seen him fooling around down here in kitty country. His eyes ticked off the slides, the opposing angles of the seesaws, the swings in which only the wind sat. Beyond all that, to the gate and the low fence that divided the playground from the lawn and the topiary. The lions gathered protectively around the path, the rabbit bent over as if to crop grass, the buffalo ready to charge, the crouching dog. Beyond them, the putting green and the hotel itself. From here he could even see the raised lip of the rope court on the overlook's western side. Everything was just as it had been. So why had the flesh of his face and hands begun to creep? And why had the hair along the back of his neck begun to stand up, as if the flesh back there had suddenly tightened? He squinted up at the hotel again, but that was no answer. It simply stood there, its windows dark, a tiny thread of smoke curling from the chimney, coming from the banked fire in the lobby. "Buster, you better get going, or they're gonna come back and wonder if you were doing anything all the while." Sure, get going. Because the snow was coming and he had to get the damn hedges trimmed. It was part of the agreement. Besides, they wouldn't dare. Who wouldn't? What wouldn't? Dare to do what? He began to walk back toward the hedge clipper at the foot of the big kid slide, and the sound of his feet crunching on the crushed stone seemed abnormally loud. Now the flesh on his area that must not be mentioned had begun to creep too, and his buttocks felt hard and heavy like stone. Jesus, what is this? He stopped by the hedge clipper but made no move to pick it up. Yes, there was something different in the topiary, and it was so simple, so easy to see, that he just wasn't picking it up. Come on, he scolded himself. You just trimmed the fucking rabbit. So what's the... That's it. His breath stopped in his throat. The rabbit was down on all fours, cropping grass. Its belly was against the ground. But not 10 minutes ago it had been up on its hind legs. Of course it had been. He had trimmed its ears and its belly. His eyes darted to the dog. When he had come down the path it had been setting up, as if begging for a sweet. Now it was crouched, head tilted, the clipped wedge of mouth seeming to snarl silently. And the lions, oh no, baby, oh no, no way. The lions were closer to the path. The two on his right had subtly changed positions, had drawn closer together. The tail of the one on the left now almost jutted out over the path. When he had come past them and through the gate, that lion had been on the right, and he was quite sure its tail had been curled around it. They were no longer protecting the path. They were blocking it. Jack put his hand suddenly over his eyes and then took it away. The picture didn't change. A soft sigh, too quiet to be a groan, escaped him. In his drinking days, he had always been afraid of something like this happening. But when you were a heavy drinker, you called it the DTs. Good old Ray Millenden Lost Weekend, seeing the bugs coming out of the walls. What did you call it when you were cold sober? The question was meant to be rhetorical, but his mind answered it. You call it insanity. Nevertheless, staring at the hedge animals, he realized something had changed while he had his hand over his eyes. The dog had moved closer. No longer crouching, it seemed to be in a running posture. Haunches flexed, one front leg forward, the other back. The hedge mouth yawned wider. The prune sticks looked sharp and vicious. And now he fancied he could see faint eye indentations in the greenery as well, looking at him. Why do they have to be trimmed? He thought hysterically. They're perfect. Another soft sound. He involuntarily backed up a step when he looked at the lions. One of the two on the right seemed to have drawn slightly ahead of the other. Its head was lowered. One paw had stolen almost all the way to the low fence. Dear God, what next? Next it leaps over and gobbles you up like something in an evil nursery fable. It was like the game they had played when they were kids, Red Light. One person was it, and while he turned his back and counted to 10, the others crept forward. When it got to 10, he whirled around, and if he caught anyone moving, they were out of the game. The others remained frozen in statue postures until it turned his back and counted again. They got closer and closer, and at last, somewhere between 5 and 10, you'd feel a hand on your back. Gravel rattled on the path. He jerked his head around to look at the dog, and it was halfway down the pathway, just behind the lions now, its mouth wide and yawning. Before, it had only been a hedge clipped in the general shape of a dog, something that lost all definition when you got up close to it. But now Jack could see that it had been clipped to look like a German shepherd, and shepherds could be mean. You could train shepherds to kill. A low rustling sound. Let me take another sip. Ooh, it's getting good though. The lion on the left had advanced all the way to the fence now. Its muzzle was touching the boards. It seemed to be grinning at him. Jack backed up another 2 steps. His head was thudding crazily, and he could feel the dry rasp of his breath in his throat. Now the buffalo had moved, circling to the right, behind and around the rabbit. The head was lowered, the green hedge horns pointing at him. The thing was, you couldn't watch all of them, not all at once. He began to make a whining sound, unaware in his locked concentration that he was making any sound at all. His eyes darted from one hedge creature to the next, trying to see them move. The wind gusted, making a hungry, rattling sound in the close, matted branches. What kind of sound would there be if they got him? But of course he knew. A snapping, rending, breaking sound. It would be, no, 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 I will not believe this, not at all. He clapped his hands over his eyes, clutching at his hair, his forehead, his throbbing temples, and he stood like that for a long time, dread building until he could stand it no longer, and he pulled his hands away with a cry. By the putting green, the dog was setting up, as if begging for a scrap. The buffalo was grazing with disinterest back toward the rope court, as it had been when Jack had come down with the clippers. The rabbit stood on its hind legs, ears up to catch the faintest sound, freshly clipped belly exposed. The lions, rooted into place, stood beside the path. He stood frozen for a long time, the harsh breath in his throat finally slowing. He reached for his cigarettes and shook 4 of them out onto the gravel. He stooped down and picked them up, groped for them, never taking his eyes from the topiary for fear the animals would begin to move again. He picked them up, stuffed 3 carelessly back into the pack, and lit the 4th. After 2 deep drags, he dropped it and crushed it out. He went to the hedge clipper and picked it up. "I'm very tired," he said, and now it seemed okay to talk out loud. It didn't seem crazy at all. "I've been under a strain, the wasps, the play, Al calling me like that, but it's all right." He began to trudge back up to the hotel. Part of his mind tugged fretfully at him, tried to make him detour around the hedge animals, but he went directly up the gravel path through them. A faint breeze rattled through them, that was all. He had imagined the whole thing. He'd had a bad scare, but it was over now. In the Overlook's kitchen, he paused to take 2 Excedrin, and then went downstairs and looked at papers until he heard the dim sound of the hotel truck rattling into the driveway. He went up to meet them. He felt all right. He saw no need to mention his hallucination. He'd had a bad scare, but it was over now. Okay. That was actually a good chapter. Some interesting stuff happened for once. You don't get that at every chapter. Certainly not. Okay, let me pour myself some more tea. I mean, I already have poured some more tea. Let me take a drink of my tea. Ah, there we go. Actually, one more for the road. One more for the road. Okay. There we go. Alright, let's see. Hold on, let me take a swish of water just to like keep my mouth lubricated. Okay, here we go. Chapter 24. Snow. It was dusk. They stood on the porch in the fading light, Jack up in the middle, his left arm around Danny's shoulders and his right arm around Wendy's waist. Together they watched as the decision was taken out of their hands. The sky had been completely clouded over by 2:30, and it had begun to snow. Excuse me. It had begun to snow an hour later. And this time you didn't need a weatherman to tell you it was serious snow. No flurry that was gonna melt or blow away when the evening wind started to whoop. At first it had fallen in perfectly straight lines, building up a snow cover that coated everything evenly. But now, an hour after it had started, the wind had begun to blow from the northwest, and the snow had begun to drift against the porch and the sides of the Overlook's driveway. Beyond the grounds, the highway had disappeared under an even blanket of white. The hedge animals were also gone, But when Wendy and Danny had gotten home, she had commended him on the good job he had done. "Do you think so?" he had asked, and said no more. Now the hedges were buried under amorphous white cloaks. Curiously, all of them were thinking different thoughts, but feeling the same emotion. Relief. The bridge had been crossed. "Will it ever be spring?" Wendy murmured. Jack squeezed her tighter. "Before you know it. What do you say we go in and have some supper? It's cold out here." She smiled. All afternoon Jack had seemed distant and, well, odd. Now he sounded more like his normal self. "Fine by me. How about you, Danny?" "Sure." So they went in together, leaving the wind to build to the low-pitched scream that would go on all night. A sound they would get to know well. Flakes of snow swirled and danced across the porch. The Overlook faced it as it had for nearly 3/4 of a century. Its darkened windows now bearded with snow, indifferent to the fact that it was now cut off from the world. Or possibly it was pleased with the prospect. Inside its shell, the three of them went about their early evening routine, like microbes trapped in the intestine of a monster. I mean, how that... Another thing Stephen King does, that chapter was 2 pages. 2 whole pages, and that's it. He's a silly little man. A quirky little man. Longest chapter. Alright, I guess we're just right on to chapter 25. Inside 217. A week and a half later, 2 feet of snow lay 2 feet of snow lay white and crisp and even on the grounds of the Overlook Hotel. The hedge menagerie was buried up to its haunches. The rabbit, frozen on its hind legs, seemed to be rising from a white pool. Some of the drifts were over 5 feet deep. The wind was constantly changing them, sculpting them into sinuous dune-like shapes. Twice, Jack had snowshoed clumsily around to the equipment shed for a shovel to clear the porch. The third time he shrugged, simply cleared a path through the towering drift lying against the door, and let Danny amuse himself by sledding to the right and left of the path. The truly heroic drifts lay against the Overlook's west side. Some of them towered to a height of 20 feet, and beyond them the ground was scoured bare to the grass by the constant wind flow. The first floor windows were covered, and the view from the dining room which Jack had so admired on closing day was now no more exciting than a view of a blank movie screen. Their phone had been out for the last 8 days, and the CB radio in Ullman's office was now their only communications link with the outside world. It snowed every day now, sometimes only brief flurries that powdered the glittering snow crust. Sometimes for real, the low whistle of the wind cranking up to a womanish scream or shriek that made the old hotel rock and groan alarmingly even in its deep cradle of snow. Nightly temperatures had not gotten above 10 degrees, and although the thermometer in the kitchen service entrance sometimes got as high as 25 in the early afternoons, the steady knife edge of the wind made it uncomfortable to go out without a ski mask. But they all did go out on the days when the sun shone, usually wearing 2 sets of clothing and mittens on over their gloves. Getting out was almost a compulsive thing. The hotel was circled with the double track of Danny's flexible flyer. The permutations were nearly endless. Danny riding while his parents pulled. Danny riding and laughing while Wendy and Danny tried to pull. It was just impossible for them to pull him on the icy crust, and flatly impossible when powder covered it. Danny and Mommy riding, Wendy riding by herself while her men huffed and puffed, white vapor like dray horses, pretending she was heavier than she was. They laughed a great deal on these sled excursions around the house, but the whooping and impersonal voice of the wind, so huge and hollowly sincere, made their laughter seem tinny and forced. They had seen caribou tracks in the snow, and once the caribou themselves, a group of 5 standing motionlessly below the security fence. They had all taken turns with Jack's Zycicon binoculars to see them better, and looking at them had given Wendy a weird, unreal feeling. They were standing leg deep in the snow that covered the highway, and it came to her that between now and the spring thaw, the road belonged more to the caribou than it did to them. Now the things that men had made up here were neutralized. The caribou understood that, she believed. She had put the binoculars down and had said something about starting lunch, and in the kitchen she had cried a little, trying to rid herself of the awful pent-up feeling that sometimes fell on her like a large pressing hand over her heart. She thought of the caribou. She thought of the wasps Jack had put out on the service entrance platform under the Pyrex bowl to freeze. There were plenty of snowshoes hung from nails in the equipment shed, and Jack found a pair to fit each one of them. Although Danny's pair was quite a bit outsized, Jack did well with them. Although he had not snowshoed since his boyhood in Berlin, New Hampshire, he retaught himself quickly. Wendy didn't care much for it. Every 15 minutes of trampling around on the outsized lace paddles made her legs and ankles ache outrageously. But Danny was intrigued and working hard to pick up the knack. He still fell often, but Jack was pleased with his progress. He said that by February, Danny would be skipping circles around both of them. The day was overcast, and by noon the sky had already begun to spit snow. The radio was promising another 8 to 12 inches and chanting hosannas to precipitation, that great god of Colorado skiers. Wendy, sitting in the bedroom and knitting a scarf, thought to herself that she knew exactly what the skiers could do with all that snow. She knew exactly where they could put it. Jack was in the cellar. He had gone down to check the furnace and boiler. Such checks had become a ritual with him since the snow had closed them in. And after satisfying himself that everything was going well, he had wandered through the arch, screwed the light bulb on, and had seated himself in an old and cobwebby camp chair he had found. He was leafing through the old records and papers, constantly wiping his mouth with his handkerchief as he did so. Confinement had bleached his skin of its autumn tan, and as he sat hunched over the yellowed, crackling sheets, his reddish-blonde hair tumbling untidily over his forehead, he looked slightly lunatic. He had found some odd things tucked in amongst the invoices, bills of lading, receipts, disquieting things, a bloody strip of sheeting, a dismembered teddy bear that seemed to have been slashed to pieces, a crumpled sheet of Violet Lady's stationery, a ghost of perfume still clinging to it beneath the musk of age, a note begun and left unfinished in faded blue ink. Dearest Tommy, I can't think so well up here as I'd hoped. About us, I mean, of course. Who else? Ha. Things keep getting in the way. I've had strange dreams about things going bump in the night. Can you believe that? And that was all. The note was dated June 27th, 1934. He found a hand puppet that seemed to be either a witch or a warlock. Something with long teeth and a pointy hat, at any rate. It had been improbably tucked between a bundle of natural gas receipts and a bundle of receipts for Vichy water. I think I'm pronouncing that right. And something that seemed to be a poem scribbled on the back of a menu in dark pencil. Medic, are you here? I've been sleepwalking again, my dear. The plants are moving under the rug. No date on the menu, and no name on the poem, if it was a poem. Elusive, but fascinating. It seemed to him that these things were like pieces in a jigsaw, things that would eventually fit together if he could find the right linking pieces. And so he kept looking, jumping and wiping his lips every time the furnace roared into life behind him. Danny was standing outside room 217 again. The passkey was in his pocket. He was staring at the door with a kind of drugged avidity, and his upper body seemed to twitch and jiggle beneath his flannel shirt. He was humming softly and tunelessly. He hadn't wanted to come here, not after the fire hose. He was scared to come here. He was scared that he had taken the passkey again, disobeying his father. He had wanted to come here. Curiosity killed the cat. Satisfaction brought him back. Was like a constant fishhook in his brain, a kind of nagging siren song that would not be appeased. And hadn't Mr. Halloran said, "I don't think there's anything here that can hurt you"? You promised. Promises were meant to be broken. Ooh, let me pour myself some more tea real quick. My throat's getting itchy. I mean, not itchy, but like, you know, scraggly. Can't be doing nothing with a scraggly throat. Okay, let's see. He jumped at that. It was as if the thought had come from outside, insectile, buzzing, softly cajoling. Promises were made to be broken, my dear Redrum, to be broken. Splintered, shattered, hammered apart. 4. His nervous humming broke into low atonal song. Lulu, skip to my Lou, my darling. Hadn't Mr. Halloran been right? Hadn't that been, in the end, the reason why he had kept silent and allowed the snow to close him in? Just close your eyes and it'll be gone. What he had seen in the presidential suite had gone away, and the snake had only been a fire hose that had fallen onto the rug. Yes, even the blood in the presidential suite had been harmless. Something old, something that happened long before he was born or even thought of. Something that was done with. Like a movie that only he could see. There was nothing, really nothing, in this hotel that could hurt him. And if he had to prove that to himself by going into this room, shouldn't he do so? Lou, skip to my Lou. Curiosity killed the cat, my dear Redrum, my dear. Satisfaction brought him back safe and sound from toes to crown. From head to ground, he was safe and sound. He knew that those things are like scary pictures. They can't hurt you, but oh my God, what big teeth you have, Grandma. And is that a wolf in a Bluebeard suit or a Bluebeard in a wolf suit? And I'm so glad you asked, because curiosity killed the cat, and it was the hope of satisfaction that brought him up the hall, treading softly over the blue and twisting jungle carpet. He had stopped by the fire extinguisher, had put the brass nozzle back into the frame, and then had poked it repeatedly with his finger, heart thumping, whispering, "Come on and hurt me. Come on and hurt me, you cheap prick. Can't do it, can you? Huh? You're nothing but a cheap fire hose. Can't do nothing but lie there. Come on, come on." He had felt insane with bravado, and nothing had happened. It was only a hose after all, only canvas and brass. You could hack it to pieces and it would never complain, never twist and jerk and bleed green slime all over the blue carpet, because it was only a hose, not a nose and not a rose, not glass buttons or satin bows, not a snake in a sleepy doze. And he had hurried on because he was late. "I'm late," said the White Rabbit. The White Rabbit, yes. Now there was a white rabbit out by the playground. Once it had been green, but now it was white, as if something had shocked it repeatedly on the snowy, windy nights and turned it old. Danny took the passkey from his pocket and slid it into the lock. Lulu. The White Rabbit had been on its way to a croquet party. To the Red Queen's croquet party. Storks for mallets, hedgehogs for balls. He touched the key, let his fingers wander over it. His head felt dry and sick. He turned the key and the tumblers thumped back smoothly. Off with his head, off with his head, off with his head. This game isn't croquet though, the mallets are too short. This game is whack boom, straight through the wicket. Off with his head! Danny pushed the door open. It swung smoothly without a creak. He was standing just outside a large combination bed-sitting room, and although the snow had not reached up this far, the highest drifts were still a foot below the second-floor windows. The room was dark because Daddy had closed all the shutters on the western exposure 2 weeks ago. He stood in the doorway, fumbled to his right, and found the switch plate. 2 bulbs and an overhead cut glass fixture came on. Oh, gosh. Hiccups. Okay. Anyways. Danny stepped further in and looked around. The rug was deep and soft, a quiet rose color. Soothing. A double bed with a white coverlet. A writing desk. Pray tell me, why is a raven like a writing desk? By the large shuttered window. During the season, the constant writer, having a wonderful time, wish you were fear, would have a pretty view of the mountains to describe the folks back at home. He stepped further in. Nothing here, nothing at all. Only an empty room, cold because Daddy was heating the east wing today. A bureau, a closet, its door open to reveal a clutch of a closet, its door open to reveal a clutch of hotel hangers, the kind you can't steal. A Gideon Bible on an end table. To his left was the bathroom door, a full-length mirror on it reflecting his own white-faced image. That door was ajar, and he watched his double nod slowly. Yes, that's where it was, whatever it was. In there, in the bathroom. His double walked forward as if to escape the glass. It put its hand out, pressed it against his own. Then it fell away at an angle as the bathroom door swung open. He looked in. A long room, old-fashioned like a Pullman car. Tiny white hexagonal tiles on the floor. At the far end, a toilet with the lid up. At the right, a wash basin and another mirror above it, the kind that hides a medicine cabinet. To the left, a huge white tub on claw feet, the shower curtain pulled closed. Danny stepped into the bathroom and walked toward the tub dreamily, as if propelled from outside himself. As if this whole thing were one of the dreams Tony had brought him, that he would perhaps see something nice when he pulled the shower curtain back, something Daddy had forgotten or Mommy had lost, something that would make them both happy. So he pulled the shower curtain back. The woman in the tub had been dead for a long time. She was bloated and purple, her gas-filled belly rising out of the cold, ice-rimmed water like some fleshy island. Her eyes were fixed on Danny's, glassy and huge like marbles. She was grinning. Okay, bro, can you, stop? Christ, these neighbors, I hate them. Okay, anyways. She was grinning, her purple lips pulled back in a grimace. Her breasts lolled. Her pubic hair floated. Ew. Her hands were frozen on the knurled porcelain sides of the tub like crab claws. Danny shrieked, but the sound never escaped his lips. Turning inward and inward, it fell down in his darkness like a stone in a well. He took a single blundering step backward, hearing his heels clack on the white hexagonal tiles, and at the same moment his urine broke, spilling effortlessly out of him. The woman was sitting up. Still grinning, her huge marble eyes fixed on him. She was sitting up. Her dead palms made squittering noises on the porcelain. Her breasts swayed like ancient cracked punching bags. There was the minute sound of breaking ice shards. She was not breathing. She was a corpse and dead long years. Danny turned and ran, bolting through the bathroom door, his eyes starting from their sockets, his hair on end like the hair of a hedgehog about to be turned into a sacrificial croquet or roque ball, his mouth open and soundless. He ran full tilt into the outside door of 217, which was now closed. He began hammering on it, far beyond realizing that it was unlocked, and he had only to turn the knob to let himself out. His mouth pealed forth deafening screams that were beyond human auditory range. He could only hammer on the door and hear the dead woman coming for him. Bloated belly, dry hair, outstretched hands. Something that had lain slain in that tub for perhaps years, embalmed there in magic. The door would not open. Would not. And then the voice of Dick Halloran came to him. So sudden and unexpected, so calm, that his locked vocal cords opened and he began to cry weakly. Not with fear, but with blessed relief. I don't think they can hurt you. They're like pictures in a book. Close your eyes and they'll be gone. His eyelids snapped down. His hands curled into balls. His shoulders hunched with the effort of his concentration. Nothing there, not there at all. Nothing there, there's nothing. Time passed, and he was just beginning to relax, just beginning to realize that the door must be unlocked and he could go, when the year's damp, bloat, fish-smelling hands closed softly around his throat, and he was turned implacably around to stare into that dead and purple face. Wow. Stephen King writes some gross shit. Man, he sure does, man. That was a lot. But we're on to part 4. I don't remember how many parts there are, but I mean they're just like sections of chapters. If you think that's bad, don't read it. Yeah. I was gonna read it as like my first like audio book thing, like ASMR thing, but then I realized, oh yeah, that ending is like very unfortunate. Okay, let me take a sip. Oh gosh. Man, I always end up getting tea like all over my desk, even though I'm like pouring it from a short distance. I guess it like spills up. Make up your own ending. Oh man. Okay. Ew. I think this has been a problem because there's like some dry parts on like my keyboard. That's so good. Okay. Now I got that cleaned off. Yeah, we're in part 4, Snowbound. And we're on to chapter 26, Dreamland. Hold on, I need another sip on my tea. Okay, there we go. Chapter 26, Dreamland. Knitting made her sleepy. Today even Bartok? I don't know what that is. Some cultural thing I don't understand. Even Bartok would have made her sleepy. And it wasn't Bartok on the little phonograph. It was Bach. Her hands grew slower and slower, and at the time her son was making the acquaintance of room 217's long-term resident. At the time her son was making the acquaintance, Wendy was asleep with her knitting in her lap. The yarn and needles rose in the slow time of her breathing. Her sleep was deep and she did not dream. Oh, I feel like a piece of lemon zest got stuck in my throat. Okay. Jack Torrance had fallen asleep too, but his sleep was light and uneasy, populated by dreams that seemed too vivid to be mere dreams. They were certainly more vivid than any dreams he had ever had before. His eyes had begun to get heavy as he leafed through packets of milk bills, 100 to a packet, seemingly tens of thousands altogether. Yet he gave each one a cursory glance, afraid that by not being thorough he might miss exactly the piece of Overlookiana he needed to make the mystic connection that he was sure must be here somewhere. He felt like a man with a power cord in one hand, groping around a dark and unfamiliar room for a socket. If he could find it, he would... Oh, excuse me. Good lord. If he could find it, he would be rewarded with a view of wonders. He had come to grips with Al Shockley's phone call and his request. His strange experience in the playground had helped him to do that. That had been too damn close to some kind of breakdown, and he was convinced that it was his mind in revolt against Al's high goddamn handed request that he chuck his book project. It had maybe been a signal that his own sense of self-respect could only be pushed so far before disintegrating entirely. He would write the book. If it meant the end of his association with Al Shockley, that would have to be. He would write the hotel's biography, write it straight from the shoulder, and the introduction would be his hallucination that the topiary animals had moved. The title would be uninspired but workable. Strange, the story of the Overlook Hotel. Straight from the shoulder, yes. But it would not be written vindictively in any effort to get back at Al or Stuart Ullman or George Hatfield or his father, miserable bullying drunk that he had been. Or anyone else for that matter. He would write it because the Overlook had enchanted him. Could any other explanation be so simple and so true? Or so true, rather? He would write it for the reason that he had felt that all great literature, fiction and nonfiction, was written. Truth comes out. In the end, it always comes out. He would write it because he felt he had to. 500 gallons whole milk, 100 gallons skim milk, paid, bill to accountant, 300 pints orange juice, paid. He slipped down further in his chair, still holding a clutch of the receipts. But his eyes no longer looking at what was printed there. They had become unfocused. His lids were slow and heavy. His mind had slipped from the Overlook to his father, who had been a male nurse at the Berlin Community Hospital. Big man. A fat man who had towered to 6 feet 2 inches. He had been taller than Jack, even when Jack got his full growth of 6 feet even. Not that the old man had still been around then. Runt of the litter, he would say, and then cuff Jack lovingly and laugh. There had been 2 other brothers, both taller than their father, and Becky, who at 5'10" had only been 2 inches shorter than Jack, and taller than he for most of their childhood. His relationship with his father had been like the unfurling of some flower of beautiful potential, which when wholly opened, turned out to be blighted inside. Until he had been 7, he had loved the tall, big-bellied man uncritically and strongly in spite of the spankings, the black and blues, the occasional black eye. He could remember velvet summer nights, the house quiet, oldest brother Brett out with his girl, middle brother Mike studying something, Becky and their mother in the living room, watching something on the bulky old TV, and he would sit in the hall dressed in a pajama singlet, and nothing else, ostensibly playing with his trucks, actually waiting for the moment when the silence would be broken by the door swinging open with a large bang. The bellow of his father's welcome when he saw Jackie was waiting, his own happy squeal in answer as the big man came down the hall, his pink scalp glowing beneath his crew cut in the glow of the hall light. In that light, he had always looked like some soft and flapping, oversized ghost in his hospital whites. The shirt always untucked and sometimes bloody, the pants cuffs drooping down over the black shoes. His father would sweep him into his arms, and Jackie would be propelled deliriously upward. So fast it seemed he could feel air pressure settling against his skull, like a cap made out of lead. Up and up, both of them crying, "Elevator, elevator." And there had been nights when his father in his drunkenness had not stopped the upward lift of his slab-muscled arms soon enough, and Jackie had gone right over his father's flap-topped head like a human projectile to crash land on the hall floor behind his dad. But on other nights his father would only sweep him into a giggling ecstasy. Through the zone of air where beer hung around his father's face like a mist of raindrops, to be twisted and turned and shaken like a laughing rag, and finally to be set down on his feet, hiccuping with reaction. The receipt slipped from his relaxing hand and seesawed down through the air to land lazily on the floor. His eyelids, which had settled shut with his father's image tattooed on their backs like stereopticon images, opened a little bit and then slipped back down again. He twitched a little. Consciousness, like the receipts, like autumn aspen leaves, seesawed lazily downward. That had been the first phase of his relationship with his father. And as it was drawing to its end, he had become aware that Becky and his brothers, all of them older, hated their father, and that their mother, a nondescript woman who rarely spoke above a mutter, only suffered him because her Catholic upbringing said that she must. In those days it had not seemed strange to Jack that the father won all his arguments with his children by use of his fists, and it had not seemed strange that his own love should go hand in hand with his fear. Fear of the elevator game, which might end in a splintering crash on any given night. Fear that his father's bearish good humor on his day off might suddenly change to boorish bellowing and the smack of his good right hand. And sometimes, he remembered, he had even been afraid that his father's shadow might fall over him when he was at play. It was near the end of this phase that he began to notice that Brett never brought his dates home, or Mike and Becky their chums. Love began to curdle at 9 when his father put his mother into the hospital with his cane. He had begun to carry the cane a year earlier, when a car accident had left him lame. After that, he was never without it, long and black and thick and gold-headed. Now, dozing, Jack's body twitched in a remembered cringe at the sound it made in the air, a murderous swish and its heavy crack against the wall, or against flesh. He had beaten their mother for no good reason at all, suddenly and without warning. They had been at the supper table. The cane had been standing by his chair. It was a Sunday night, the end of a 3-day weekend for Daddy. A weekend which he had boozed away in his usual inimitable style. Roast chicken, peas, mashed potatoes. Daddy at the head of the table, his plate heaped high, snoozing or nearly snoozing. His mother passing plates. And suddenly Daddy had been wide awake, his eyes set deeply into their fat eye sockets, glittering with a kind of stupid, evil petulance. They flickered from one member of the family to the next, and the vein in the center of his forehead was standing out prominently, always about sign. One of his large, freckled hands had dropped to the gold knob of his cane, caressing it. He said something about coffee. To this day, Jack was sure it had been coffee that his father said. Mama had opened her mouth to answer, and then the cane was whickering through the air, smashing against her face. Blood spurted from her nose. Becky screamed. Mama's spectacles dropped into her gravy. The cane had been drawn back, had come down again, this time on top of her head, splitting the scalp. Mama had dropped to the floor. He had been out of his chair and around where she lay dazed on the carpet, brandishing the cane, moving with a fat man's grotesque speed and agility, little eyes flashing, jowls quivering as he spoke to her, just as he had always spoken to his children during such outbursts. Now, by Christ, I guess you'll take your medicine now, goddamn puppy. Well, come on and take your medicine. The cane had gone up and down on her 7 more times before Brett and Mike got a hold of him, dragged him away, wrestled the cane out of his hand. Jack, little Jackie, now he was little Jackie, now dozing and mumbling on a cobwebby camp chair while the furnace roared into hollow life behind him. Knew exactly how many blows it had been because his soft whump against his mother's body had been engraved on his memory, like the irrational swipe of a chisel on stone. 7 wumps, no more, no less. He and Becky crying, unbelieving, looking at their mother's spectacles lying in her mashed potatoes, one cracked lens smeared with gravy. Brett shouting at Daddy from the back hall, telling him he'd kill him if he moved. And Daddy saying over and over, "Damn little puppy, damn little whelp. Give me my cane, you damn little pup. Give it to me." Brett brandishing it hysterically, saying, "Yes, yes, I'll give it to you. Just you move a little bit and I'll give you all you want and 2 extra. I'll give you plenty." Mama getting slowly to her feet, dazed, her face already puffed and swelling like an old tire with too much air in it, bleeding in 4 or 5 different places. And she had said a terrible thing, perhaps the only thing Mama had ever said which Jackie could recall word for word. "Who's got the newspaper? Your daddy wants the funnies. Is it raining yet?" And then she had sank to her knees again, or her hair hanging in her puffed and bleeding face. Mike calling the doctor, babbling into the phone. Could he come right away? It was their mother. No, he couldn't say what the trouble was, not over the phone. Not over a party line, he couldn't. Just come. The doctor came and took Mama away to the hospital, where Daddy had worked all his adult life. Daddy sobered up some, or perhaps only with the stupid cunning of any hard-pressed animal. Told the doctor she had fallen downstairs. There was blood on the tablecloth because he had tried to wipe her dear face with it. Had her glasses flown all the way through the living room and into the dining room to land in her mashed potatoes and gravy? The doctor asked with a kind of horrid grinning sarcasm. "Is that what happened, Mark?" "I've heard of folks who can get a radio station on their gold fillings, and I've seen a man get shot between the eyes and live to tell about it. But that is a new one on me." Daddy had merely shook his head and said he didn't know. It must have fallen off her face when he brought her through into the dining room. Excuse me. The 4 kids had been stunned to silence by the calm stupendousness of the lie. 4 days later, Brett quit his job in the mill and joined the army. Jack had always felt it was not just the sudden and irrational beating his father had administered at the dinner table, but the fact that in the hospital, their mother had corroborated their father's story while holding the hand of the parish priest. Revolted, Jack had left them to whatever might come. He had been killed in Dong Ho Province in 1965, the year when Jack Torrance, undergraduate, had joined the active college agitation to end the war. He had waved his brother's bloody shirt at rallies that were increasingly well attended, but it was not Brett's face that hung before his eyes when he spoke. It was the face of his mother's dazed, uncomprehending face. His mother saying, "Who's got the newspaper?" Mike escaped 3 years later when Jack was 12. He went to UNH on a hefty merit scholarship. A year later after that, their father died of a sudden massive stroke, which occurred while he was prepping a patient for surgery. He had collapsed in his flapping and untucked hospital whites, dead possibly before he even hit the industrial black and red hospital tiles. And 3 days later, the man who had dominated Jackie's life, the irrational white ghost god, was underground. The stone-red Mark Anthony Torrance, loving father. To that, Jack would have added one line. He knew how to play elevator. There had been a great lot of insurance money. There are people who collect insurance as compulsively as others collect coins and stamps, and Mark Torrance had been that type. The insurance money came in at the same time the monthly policy payments and liquor bills stopped. For 5 years they had been rich, nearly rich. In his shallow, uneasy sleep, his face rose before him as if in a glass. His face, but not his face. The wide eyes and innocent bowed mouth of a boy sitting in the hall with his trucks, waiting for his daddy. Waiting for the white ghost god, waiting for the elevator to rise up with dizzying, exhilarating speed through the salt and sawdust mists of exhaled taverns. Waiting perhaps for it to go crashing down, spilling old clock springs out of his ears while his daddy roared with laughter. And it transformed into Danny's face, so much like his own had been. His eyes had been light blue while Danny's were cloudy gray, but the lips still made a bow and the complexion was fair. Danny in his study wearing training pants, all his papers soggy and the fine misty smell of beer rising. A dreadful batter all in ferment, rising on the wings of yeast, the breath of taverns. Snap of bone, his own voice mewling drunkenly, "Danny, you okay, Doc? Oh God, your poor sweet arm." And that face transformed into Mama's dazed face, rising up from below the table, punched and bleeding. And Mama was saying, "From your father. I repeat, an enormously important announcement from your father. Please stay tuned or tune immediately to the Happy Jack frequency. Repeat, tune in immediately to the Happy Hour frequency. I repeat." A slow dissolve, disembodied voices echoing up to him as if along an endless cloudy hallway. "Things keep getting in the way, dear Tommy. Medic, are you there? Are you here? I've been sleepwalking again, my dear. It's the inhuman monsters that I fear." "Excuse me, Mr. Ullman, but isn't this the office with its file cabinets, Ullman's big desk, a blank reservations book for next year already in place? Never misses a trick, that Ullman. All the keys hanging neatly on their hooks. Except for one. Which one? Which key? Passkey, passkey. Passkey, who's got the passkey? If we went upstairs, perhaps we'd see." And the big two-way radio on its shelf. He snapped it on. CBB transmissions coming in short, crackly bursts. He switched the band and dialed across. Bursts of music news, a preacher haranguing a softly moaning congregation, a weather report, and another voice which he dialed back to. It was his father's voice. "Kill him. You have to kill him, Jackie, and her too. Because a real artist must suffer, because each man kills the thing he loves. Because they'll always be conspiring against you, trying to hold you back and drag you down. Right this minute that boy of yours is in where he shouldn't be, trespassing. That's what he's doing. He's a goddamn little pup. Cane him for it, Jackie. Cane him within an inch of his life. Have a drink, Jackie, my boy, and we'll play the elevator game. Then I'll go with you while you give him his medicine. I know you can do it. Of course you can. You must kill him. You have to kill him, Jackie, and her too. Because a real artist must suffer. Because each man..." His father's voice going up higher and higher, becoming something maddening. Not human at all. Something squealing and petulant and maddening. The voice of the ghost god, the pig god, coming dead at him out of the radio and... "No," he screamed back. "You're dead. You're in your grave. You're not in me at all." Because he had cut all the father out of him, and it was not right that he should come back, creeping through this hotel 2 miles from the New England town where his father had lived and died. He raised the radio up and brought it down, and it smashed on the floor, spilling old clock springs and tubes like the result of some crazy elevator game gone awry, making his father's voice gone, leaving only his voice, Jack's voice, Jackie's voice. Oh, shoot. Chanting in the cold reality of the office. "Dead, you're dead, you're dead." And the startled sound of Wendy's feet hitting the floor over his head, and Wendy's startled, frightened voice. "Jack? Jack!" He stood, blinking down at the shattered radio. Now there was only the snowmobile in the equipment shed to link them to the outside world. He put his hands over his eyes and clutched at his temples. He was getting a headache. Man, that was a pretty intense chapter, if I do say so myself. Woo-wee. I'm gonna drink some tea. Man, this stuff really does get better with age, by the way. Okay, let me pour myself like a little bit more. Actually, I think that's about the rest of it. I could like transfer it onto the heating pad now. Okay. Let me do just that actually. Actually, let me take another sip first. Let's see. I mean, depending on how long this next chapter is, let me skim. Well, I don't know. I mean, it seems like maybe we could squeeze 2 more chapters. Oh no. Maybe, I don't know. Anyways. Let me take like one more sip. Just one more sip. That's all I need. I'm trying to get all this done before it gets too late. Cause I can feel like my voice like giving out already. Alright. Chapter 27, Catatonic. Wendy ran down the hall in her stocking feet and ran down the main stairs to the lobby 2 at a time. She didn't look up at the carpeted flight that led to the 2nd floor, but if she had, she would have seen Danny standing at the top of them, still and silent, his unfocused eyes directed out into indifferent space, his thumb in his mouth, the collar and shoulders of his shirt damp. There were puffy bruises on his neck and just below his chin. Jack's cries had ceased, but that did nothing to ease her fear. Ripped out of sleep by his voice, raised in that old hectoring pitch she remembered so well. She still felt that she was dreaming, but another part knew she was awake, and that terrified her more. She half expected to burst into the office and find him standing over Danny's sprawled-out body, drunk and confused. She pushed through the door and Jack was standing there, rubbing his temples with his fingers. His face was ghost white. The 2-way CB radio lay at his feet in a sprinkling of broken glass. "Wendy?" he asked uncertainly. "Wendy." The bewilderment seemed to grow, and for a moment she saw his true face. The one he ordinarily kept so well hidden, and it was a face of desperate unhappiness. The face of an animal caught in a snare beyond its ability to decipher and render harmless. Then the muscles began to work, began to writhe under the skin. The mouth began to tremble infirmly. The Adam's apple began to rise and fall. Her own bewilderment and surprise were overlaid by shock. He was going to cry. She had seen him cry before, but never since he stopped drinking. And never in those days unless he was very drunk and pathetically remorseful. He was a tight man, drum tight, and his loss of control frightened her all over again. He came toward her, the tears brimming over his lower lids now, his head shaking involuntarily as if in a fruitless effort to ward off this emotional storm. And his chest drew in a convulsive gasp that was expelled in a huge racking sob. His feet, clad in hush puppies, stumbled over the wreck of the radio, and he almost fell into her arms, making her stagger back with his weight. His breath blew into her face, and there was no smell of liquor on it. Of course not. There was no liquor up here. "What's wrong?" What's wrong? She held him as best she could. "Jack, what is it?" But he could do nothing at first but sob, clinging to her, almost crushing the wind from her, his head turning on her shoulder in that helpless, shaking, warding off gesture. His sobs were heavy and fierce. He was shuddering all over, his muscles jerking beneath his plaid shirt and jeans. "Jack, what? Tell me what's wrong." At last the sobs began to change themselves into words, most of them incoherent at first, but becoming clear as his tears began to spend themselves. "Dream. I guess it was a dream, but it was so real. I It was my mother saying that Daddy was going to be on the radio, and he was telling me to, I don't know, he was yelling at me, and so I broke the radio to shut him up. He's dead. I don't even want to dream about him. He's dead. My God, Wendy, my God. I never had a nightmare like that. I never want to have another one. Christ, it was awful. You just fell asleep in the office? No, not here. Downstairs. He was straining a little now, his weight coming off her, and the steady back and forth motion of his head first slowed and then stopped. I was looking through these old papers, sitting on a chair I set up down there. Milk receipts, dull stuff. And I guess I just drowsed off. That's when I started to dream. I must have sleepwalked up here. He essayed a shaky little laugh against her neck. Another first. Where is Danny, Jack? I don't know. Isn't he with you? He wasn't downstairs with you? He looked over his shoulder and his face tightened at what he saw on her face. Never gonna let me forget that, are you, Wendy? Jack, when I'm on my deathbed, you'll lean over and say, "It serves you right, remember the time you broke Danny's arm?" Jack! Jack what? He asked hotly and jumped to his feet. Are you denying that's what you're thinking? That I hurt him? That I hurt him once before and I could hurt him again? I want to know where he is, that's all. Go ahead, yell your fucking head off. That'll make everything okay, won't it? She turned and walked out the door. He watched her go, frozen for a moment, a blotter covered with fragments of broken glass in one hand. Then he dropped it into the wastebasket, went after her and caught her by the lobby desk. He put his hands on her shoulders and turned her around. Her face was carefully set. Wendy, I'm sorry. It was a dream. I'm upset. Forgive? Of course, she said, her face not changing expression. Her wooden shoulders slipped out of his hands. She walked to the middle of the lobby and called, "Hey, Doc, where are you?" Silence came back. She walked toward the double lobby doors, opened one of them, and stepped out onto the path Jack had shoveled. It was more like a trench. The packed and drifted snow through which the path was cut came to her shoulders. She called him again, her breath coming out in a white plume. When she came back in, she had begun to look scared. Controlling his irritation with her, he said reasonably, "Are you sure he's not sleeping in his room?" "I told you he was playing somewhere when I was knitting. I could hear him downstairs." "Did you fall asleep?" "What's that got to do with it?" "What's that got to do with it?" "Yes." "Danny, did you look to his room when he came downstairs just now?" She stopped. He nodded. "I didn't really think so." He started up the stairs without waiting for her. She followed him, half running, but he was taking the risers two at a time. She almost crashed into his back when he came to a dead stop on the first floor landing. He was rooted there, looking up, his eyes wide. "What?" she began, and followed his gaze. Danny still stood there, his eyes blank, sucking his thumb. The marks on his throat were cruelly visible in the light of the hall's electric flambeau. "Danny!" she shrieked. It broke Jack's paralysis, and they rushed up the stairs together to where he stood. Wendy fell on her knees beside him and swept the boy into her arms. Danny came pliantly enough, but he did not hug her back. It was like hugging a padded stick, and the sweet taste of horror flooded her mouth. He only sucked his thumb and stared at them with indifferent blankness. Didn't stare. Okay. Let me just redo that whole fucking sentence. He only sucked his thumb and stared with indifferent blankness out into the stairwell beyond both of them. "Danny, what happened?" Jack asked. He put out his hand to touch the puffy side of Danny's cheek. "Who did this to you?" "Don't you touch him," Wendy hissed. She clutched Danny in her arms, lifted him, and had retreated down the hallway, and had retreated halfway down the stairs before Jack could do more than stand up, confused. What? Wendy, what the hell are you? Don't you touch him. I'll kill you if you lay your hands on him again. Wendy, you bastard. She turned and ran down the rest of the stairs to the first floor. Danny's head jounced mildly up and down as she ran. His thumb was lodged securely in his mouth. His eyes were soaped windows. She turned right at the foot of the stairs, and Jack heard her feet retreat to the end of it. Their bedroom door slammed. The bolt was run home. The lock turned. Brief silence. Then the soft, muttered sounds of comforting. He stood for an unknown length of time, literally paralyzed by all that had happened in such a short space of time. His dream was still with him, painting everything a slightly unreal shade. It was as if he had taken a very mild mescaline hit. Had he maybe hurt Danny as Wendy thought? Tried to strangle his son at his dead father's request? No, he would never hurt Danny. He fell down the stairs, Doctor. He would never hurt Danny now. How could I know the bug bomb was defective? Never in his life had he been willfully vicious when he was sober, except when you almost killed George Hatfield. No, he cried into the darkness. He brought both fists crashing down on his legs again and again and again. Wendy sat in the overstuffed chair by the window with Danny on her lap, holding him, crooning the old meaningless words. The ones you never remember afterward, no matter how a thing turns out. He had folded onto her lap with neither protest nor gladness, like a paper cutout of himself, and his eyes didn't even shift toward the door when Jack cried out "No" somewhere in the hallway. The confusion had receded a little bit in her mind, but she now discovered something even worse behind it. Panic. Jack had done this. She had no doubt of it. His denials meant nothing to her. She thought it was perfectly possible that Jack had tried to throttle Danny in his sleep, just as he had smashed the CB radio in his sleep. He was having a breakdown of some kind. But what was she going to do about it? She couldn't stay locked in here forever. They would have to eat. There was really only one question, and it was asked in a mental voice of utter coldness and pragmatism, the voice of her maternity, a cold and passionless voice once it was directed away from the closed circle of mother and child and out toward Jack. It was a voice that spoke of self-preservation only after son preservation, and its question was, exactly how dangerous is he? He had denied doing it. He had been horrified at the bruises, at Danny's soft and implacable disconnection. If he had done it, a separate section of himself had been responsible. The fact that he had done it when he was asleep was, in a terrible, twisted way, encouraging. Wasn't it possible that he could be trusted to get them out of here? To get them down and away? And after that... But she could see no further than she and Danny arriving safe at Dr. Edmonds' office in Sidewinder. She had no particular need to see further. The present crisis was more than enough to keep her occupied. She crooned to Danny, rocking him on her breasts. Her fingers on his shoulder had noticed that his t-shirt was damp, but they had not bothered reporting the information to her brain in more than a cursory way. If it had been reported, she might have remembered that Jack's hands, as he had hugged her in the office and sobbed against her neck, had been dry. It might have given her pause. But her mind was still on other things. The decision had to be made. To approach Jack or not. Actually, it was not much of a decision. There was nothing she could do alone, not even carry Danny down to the office and call for help on the CB radio. He had suffered a great shock. He ought to be taken out quickly before any permanent damage could be done. She refused to let herself believe that permanent damage might already have been done. Hold on, let me take a sip. And still she agonized over it. looking for another alternative. She did not want to put Danny back within Jack's reach. She was aware now that she had made one bad decision when she had gone against her feelings and Danny's, and allowed the snow to close them in, for Jack's sake. Another bad decision when she had shelved the idea of divorce. Now she was nearly paralyzed by the idea that she might be making another mistake, one she would regret every minute of every day for the rest of her life. There was not a gun in the place. There were knives hanging from magnetized runners in the kitchen, but Jack was between her and them. In her striving to make the right decision, to find the alternative, the bitter irony of her thoughts did not occur. Oh, excuse me. An hour ago, she had been asleep, firmly convinced that things were all right, and soon would be even better. Now she was considering the possibility of using a butcher knife on her husband if he tried to interfere with her and her son. At last she stood up with Danny in her arms, her legs trembling. There was no other way. She would have to assume that Jack awake was Jack sane, and that he would help her get Danny down to Sidewinder and Dr. Edmonds. And if Jack tried to do anything but help, God help him. She went to the door and unlocked it, shifting Danny up to her shoulder. She opened it and went out into the hall. "Jack," she called nervously, and got no answer. With growing trepidation, she walked down to the stairwell, but Jack was not there. And as she stood there on the landing, wondering what to do next, the singing came up from below, rich, angry, bitterly satiric. "Roll me over in the clover, roll me over, lay me down and do it again." She was frightened even more by the sound of him than she had been by his silence, but there was still no alternative. She started down the stairs. Chapter 28. It was her. Hold on, let me get a sip first, because this is taking a while. Jack had stood on the stairs, listening to the crooning, comforting sounds coming muffled through the locked door, and slowly his confusion had given way to anger. Things had never really changed, not to Wendy. He could be off the juice for 20 years, and still when he came home at night and she embraced him at the door, he would see/sense that little flare of her nostrils as she tried to divine Scotch or gin fumes riding the outboard train of his exhalation. She was always going to assume the worst. If he and Danny had gotten into a car accident with a drunken blind man who had a stroke just before the collision, she would silently blame Danny's injuries on him and turn away. Her face as she snatched Danny away, it rose up before him, and he suddenly wanted to wipe the anger that had been on it out with his fist. She had no goddamn right. Yes, maybe at first. He had been a lush. He had done terrible things. Breaking Danny's arm had been a terrible thing. But if a man reforms, doesn't he deserve to have his reformation credited sooner or later? And if he doesn't get it, doesn't he deserve the game to go with the name? If a father constantly accuses his virginal daughter of screwing every boy in junior high, must she not at last grow weary enough of it to earn her scoldings? And if a wife secretly, and not so secretly, continues to believe that her teetotaling husband is a drunk. He got up, walked slowly down to the first floor landing, and stood there for a moment. He took his handkerchief from his back pocket, wiped his lips with it, and considered going down and pounding on the bedroom door, demanding to be let in so he could see his son. She had no right to be so goddamn high-handed. Well, sooner or later, she'd have to come out, unless she planned a radical sort of diet for the two of them. A rather ugly grin touched his lips at the thought. Let her come to him. She would in time. He went downstairs to the ground floor, stood aimlessly by the lobby desk for a moment, then turned right. He went into the dining room and stood just inside the door. The empty tables, their white linen cloths neatly cleaned and pressed beneath their clear plastic covers, glimmered up at him. All was deserted now, but dinner will be served at 8 p.m., unmasking and dancing at midnight. Jack walked among the tables, momentarily forgetting his wife and son upstairs, forgetting the dream, the smashed radio, the bruises. He trailed his fingers over the slick plastic dust covers, trying to imagine how it must have been on that hot August night in 1945. The war won, the future stretching ahead so various and new, like a land of dreams. The bright and parti-colored Japanese lanterns hung the whole length of the circular drive, the golden yellow light spilling from these high windows that were now drifted over with snow. Men and women in costume, here a glittering princess, there a high-booted cavalier, flashing jewelry and flashing wit everywhere. Dancing, liquor flowing freely, first wine and then cocktails and then perhaps Boilermakers. The level of conversation going up and up until the jolly cry rang out from the bandmaster's podium, the cry of "Unmask, unmask," and then the red death held sway. He found himself standing on the other side of the dining room, just outside the stylized batwing doors of the Colorado Lounge, where, on that night in 1945, all the booze would have been free. Belly up to the bar, partner. The drinks are on the house. He stepped through the bat wings and into the deep folded shadows of the bar, and a strange thing occurred. He had been in here before, once to check the inventory sheet Ullman had left, and he knew the place had been stripped clean. The shelves were totally bare, but now lit only murkily by the light which filtered through from the dining room, which was itself only dimly lit because of the snow blocking the windows. He thought he saw ranks and ranks of bottles twinkling mutedly behind the bar, and siphons and even beer dripping from the spigots of all three highly polished taps. Yes, he could even smell beer, that damp and fermented and yeasty odor, no different from the smell that had hung finely misted around his father's face every night when he came home from work. Eyes widening, he fumbled for the wall switch, and the low, intimate bar lighting came on. Circles of 20-watt bulbs implanted on the tops of the 3 wagon wheel chandeliers overhead. The shelves were all empty. They had not even as yet gathered a good coat of dust. The beer taps were dry, as were the chrome drains beneath them. To his left and right, the velvet upholstered booths stood like men with high backs, each one designed to give a maximum of privacy to the couple inside. Straight ahead across the red carpeted floor. I said that right the first time. 40 bar stools stood around the horseshoe-shaped bar. Each stool was upholstered in leather and embossed with cattle brands. Circle H, Bar D, Bar, that was fitting. Rocking W, Lazy B. He approached it, giving his head a little shake in bewilderment as he did so. It was like that day on the playground but there was no sense in thinking about that. Surely he could have sworn that he had seen those bottles vaguely. It was true, the way you see the darkened shapes of furniture in a room where the curtains had been drawn, mild glints on glass. The only thing that remained was the smell of beer. And Jack knew that was a smell that faded into the woodwork of every bar in the world after a certain period of time, not to be eradicated by any cleaner invented. Yet the smell here seemed sharp, almost fresh. He sat down on one of the stools and propped his elbows on the bar's leather-cushioned edge. At his left hand there was a bowl for peanuts, now empty of course. The first bar he'd been in for 19 months and the damn thing was dry. Just his luck. All the same, a bitterly powerful wave of nostalgia swept over him, and the physical craving for a drink seemed to work itself up from his belly to his throat to his mouth and nose, shriveling and wrinkling the tissues as it went, making them cry out for something wet and long and cold. He glanced at the shelves again in wild, irrational hope, but the shelves were just as empty as before. He grinned in pain and frustration. His fists, clenching slowly, made minute scratchings on the bar's leather-padded edge. "Hi, Lloyd," he said. "A little slow tonight, isn't it?" Lloyd said it was. Lloyd asked him what it would be. "Now I'm really glad you asked me that," Jack said. "Really glad. Because I happen to have 2 20s and 2 10s in my wallet, and I was afraid they'd be sitting right there until sometime next April. There isn't a 7-Eleven around here, would you believe it? And I thought they had 7-Elevens on the fucking moon." Lloyd sympathized. "So here's what," Jack said. "You set me up an even 20 martinis. An even 20, just like that, kazang. One for every month I've been on the wagon and one to grow on. You can do that, can't you? You aren't too busy?" Lloyd said he wasn't busy at all. "Good man. You line those Martians up right along the bar and I'm gonna take them down one by one. White man's burden, Lloyd, my man." Lloyd turned to do the job. Jack reached into his pocket for his money clip and came out with an Excedrin bottle instead. His money clip was on the bedroom bureau, and of course his skinny Shank's wife had locked him out of the bedroom. "Nice going, Wendy, you bleeding bitch." "I seem to be momentarily late," Jack said. "How's my credit in this joint anyhow?" Lloyd said his credit was fine. "That's super. I like you, Lloyd. You're always the best of them. Best damn barkeep between Bar and Portland, Maine. Best damn barkeep between Bar and Portland, Maine. Portland, Oregon, for that matter." Lloyd thanked him for saying so. Jack thumped the cap from his Excedrin bottle, shook 2 tablets out, and flipped them into his mouth. The familiar, acid-compelling taste flooded in. He had a sudden sensation that people were watching him, curiously and with some contempt. The booths behind him were full. There were graying, distinguished men and beautiful young girls, all of them in costume, watching this sad exercise in the dramatic arts with cold amusement. Jack whirled on his stool. The booths were all empty, stretching away from the lounge door to the left and right. The line on his left cornering to flank the bar's horseshoe curve down the short length of the room. Padded leather seats and backs, gleaming dark formica tables, an ashtray on each one, a book of matches in each ashtray, the words Colorado Lounge stamped on each in gold leaf above the Batwing door logo. He turned back, swallowing the rest of the dissolving Excedrin with a grimace. "Lloyd, you're a wonder," he said. "Set up already. Your speed is only exceeded by the soulful beauty of your Neapolitan eyes. Salud." Jack contemplated the 20 imaginary drinks, the martini glasses blushing droplets of condensation, each with a swizzle poked through a plump green olive. He could almost smell gin on the air. "The wagon," he said. "Have you ever been acquainted with a gentleman who has hopped up on the wagon?" Lloyd allowed as how he had met such men from time to time. "Have you ever renewed acquaintances with such a man after he hopped back off?" Lloyd cannot in all honesty recall. "You never did then," Jack said. He curled his hand around the first drink, carried his fist to his mouth, which was open, and turned his fist up. He swallowed and then tossed the imaginary glass over his shoulder. The people were back again, fresh from their costume ball, studying him, laughing behind their backs. He could feel them. If the back bar had featured a mirror instead of those damn stupid empty shelves, he could have seen them. Let them stare. Fuck them. Let anybody stare who wanted to stare. No, you never did, he told Lloyd. Few men ever return from the fabled wagon, but those who do come with a fearful tale to tell. When you jump on it, it seems like the brightest, cleanest wagon you ever saw, with 10-foot wheels to keep the bed of it high out of the gutter where all the drunks are laying around with their brown bags and their Thunderbird and their granddad Flash's Pop Skull bourbon. You're away from all the people who throw you nasty looks and tell you to clean up your act or go put it on in another town. From the gutter, that's the finest looking wagon you ever saw, Lloyd, my boy. All hung with bunting and a brass band in front and 3 margerettes to each side, twirling their batons and flashing their panties at you. Man, you gotta get on that wagon and away from the juicers that are straining canned heat and smelling their own puke to get high again, and poking along the gutter for butts with half an inch left below the filter. He drained 2 more imaginary drinks and tossed the glasses back over his shoulder. He could almost hear them smashing on the floor. And goddamn if he wasn't starting to feel high. It was the Excedrin. So you climb up, he told Lloyd. And ain't you glad to be there? My God, yes, that's affirmative. That wagon is the biggest and best float in the whole parade, and everybody is lining the streets and clapping and cheering and waving, all for you. Except for the winos passed out in the gutter. Those guys used to be your friends, but that's all behind you now. He carried his empty fist to his mouth and sluiced down another. 4 down, 16 to go. Making excellent progress. He swayed a little off the stool. Let him stare if that was how they got off. Take a picture, folks. It'll last you longer. Then you start to see things, Lloydie, my boy. Things you missed from the gutter. Like how the floor of the wagon is nothing but straight pine boards, so fresh they're still bleeding sap. And if you took your shoes off, you'd be sure to get a splinter. Like how the only furniture in the wagon is those long benches with high backs and no cushions to sit on. And in fact, they are nothing but pews with a songbook every 5 feet or so. Like how all the people sitting in the pews on the wagon are those flat-chested Albertos in their long dresses, with a little lace around the collar and their hair pulled back into buns until it's so tight you can almost hear it screaming. And every face is flat and pale and shiny, and they're all singing, "Shall we gather at the river? The beautiful, the river." And up front there's this reeking bitch with blonde hair playing the organ and telling them to sing louder, sing louder. And someone slams the songbook into your hands and says, "Sing it out, brother. If you expect to stay on this wagon, you gotta sing morning, noon, and night, especially at night." And that's when you realize what the wagon really is, Lloyd. It's a church with bars on the windows, a church for women, and a prison for you. He stopped. Lloyd was gone. Worse still, he had never been there. The drinks had never been there. Only the people in the booths, the people from the costume party. And he could almost hear their muffled laughter as they held their hands to their mouths and pointed, their eyes sparkling with cruel pinpoints of light. He whirled around again. "Leave me alone?" All the booths were empty. The sound of laughter had died like a stir of autumn leaves. Jack stared at the empty lounge for a tick of time, his eyes wide and dark. A pulse beat noticeably in the center of his forehead. In the very center of him a cold certainty was forming, and the certainty was that he was losing his mind. He felt an urge to pick up the bar stool next to him, reverse it, and go through the place like an avenging whirlwind. Instead, he whirled back around to the bar and began to bellow, "Roll me over in the clover, roll me over, lay me down and do it again." Danny's face rose before him. Not Danny's normal face, lively and alert, the eyes sparkling and open, but the catatonic, zombie-like face of a stranger, the eyes dull and opaque, the mouth pursed babyishly around his thumb. what he was doing, sitting here and talking to himself like a sulky teenager, when his son was upstairs someplace, acting like something that belonged in a padded room, acting the way Wally Hollis said Vic Stenger had been before the men in the white coats had come to take him away. But I never put a hand on him. God damn it, I didn't. Jack, the voice was timid, hesitant. He was... oh, excuse me. Hey. Gosh, okay, I'm good. He was so startled he almost fell off the stool, whirling it around. Wendy was standing just inside the Batwing doors. Danny cradled in her arms like some waxen horror show dummy. The three of them made a tableau that Jack felt very strongly. It was just before the curtain of Act 2 in some old-time temperance play, one so poorly mounted that the prop man had forgotten to stock the shelves of the Den of Iniquity. I never touched him, Jack said thickly. I never have since the night I broke his arm, not even to spank him. Jack, that doesn't matter now. What matters is... This matters, he shouted. He brought one fist crashing down on the bar, hard enough to make the empty peanut dishes jump. It matters, goddammit, it matters. Jack, we have to get him off the mountain. Danny began to stir in her arms. The slack, empty expression on his face had begun to break up like a thick mat of ice over some buried surface. His lips twisted as if at some weird taste. His eyes widened. His hands came up as if to cover them, and then dropped back. Abruptly, he stiffened in her arms. His back arched into a bow, like making Wendy stagger. And suddenly he began to shriek, mad sounds that escaped his straining throat in bolt after crazy echoing bolt. The sound seemed to fill the empty downstairs and come back at them like banshees. There might have been 100 Dannys all screaming at once. Jack, she cried in terror. Oh God, Jack, what's wrong with him? He came off the stool, numb from the waist down, more frightened than he had ever been in his life. What hole had his son poked through and into? What dark nest? And what had been in there to sting him? Danny, he roared. Danny! Danny saw him. He broke his mother's grip with a sudden fierce strength that gave her no chance to hold him. She stumbled back against one of the booths and nearly fell into it. Daddy, he screamed, running to Jack, his eyes huge and frightened. Oh, Daddy, Daddy, it was her! Her! Oh, Daddy! He slammed into Jack's arms like a blunt arrow, making Jack rock on his feet. Danny clutched at him furiously, at first seeming to pummel him like a fighter, then clutching his belt and sobbing against his shirt. Jack could feel his son's face, hot and working, against his belly. Daddy, it was her. Jack looked slowly up into Wendy's face. His eyes were like small silver coins. Wendy? Voice soft, nearly purring. Wendy, what did you do to him? Wendy stared back at him in stunned disbelief, her face pallid. She shook her head. Oh, Jack, you must know. Outside, it had begun to snow again. I mean, hey, that's a good old cliffhanger to end off on. Woo-wee. Wee. Man, that sure is something. But hey, we made it another 2 hours, and I did not die. I think I'm gonna be okay, actually. So yeah, I think that's voice getting stronger. Maybe don't quote me on that. It might just like go back to being very fragile. I mean, I honestly don't know like how people strengthen their voices for this kind of stuff. But I think that's probably gonna be it for this stream. I got the thing on wait, what was it? I got the thing on Friday. Maybe start eating oily foods before streaming. I mean, yeah, maybe. I might have to like just have a little bit of like olive oil off to the side to like swallow a little bit to keep like my whole situation lubricated. But yeah, I have the thing on Friday with Savvy. Oh shoot. Hiccups again. Goddamn. My worst enemy. But yeah, I'm having the thing with Savvy. We're doing that on his channel. I'm very excited about that. I think it's gonna be fun. I hope people attend, because I think that'll make it even more fun. But yeah, that's gonna be it for me, and that's chapter 29 we're on for the next one. So I'll have to keep that in mind. So yeah, that's gonna be it for me. So I hope everyone has a good morning, evening, afternoon, night, whatever it is, wherever you are. And I love you.